This is Granddaddy Speaks, and I'm Andy Beverly. This is a really good story that my granddaddy told me when I was a little boy in the 1930s. So I had to have been probably 5 or 6 years old because I was born in 1933 and I was old enough for my granddaddy to be telling me stories and me to understand them. The story is about a really good animal named Ring the pig. Now, a long time ago, when people had pigs, the pig that was going to be the daddy pig of all the little pigs in the neighborhood would belong to one of the farmers, and he would have a ring, a metal ring, in his nose, so that when you took him over to the neighbor's farm to help start a bunch of baby pigs coming along, you could lead him with a little leash on his nose, and that way he wouldn't walk off in the bushes and start digging around trying to find something to eat. He would know to follow you. And these pigs like that were daddy pigs, were called boars. And those boar pigs became very tame after they had found out that all you were doing was taking them from place to place to meet nice lady pigs and to eat and have food and to have fun. So, when the war between the North and the South was over, my granddaddy father, who had been a general in the Southern Army, came home and a lot of everything was gone. The chickens had been eaten and the cows had been taken away, and a lot of stuff had happened. When the South lost the war, they didn't get to keep a lot of stuff. They got given away to the army that was coming through. And that's what happens sometimes when you lose a war. The army that wins it takes a lot of stuff away, and that's not unusual in the history of man. And so Granddaddy and his father, my great-grandfather, had to work real hard on the farm just to get enough stuff to eat. But they had gotten this wonderful pig and put a ring in his nose, and he was a very friendly, good pig named Ring the pig. And whenever there were babies caused by Ring the pig and one of the other farmer's lady pig, Mr. McDowell and his wife and my grandfather McDowell got some of those baby pigs because it was their boar pig, daddy pig, great big strong daddy pig, that got the little pigs to come. Now, they were poor and everybody was struggling to make things get by, and the government was telling Granddaddy McDowell's father, great-granddaddy McDowell, my great-grandfather McDowell, that he had to pay the tax on his farm or they were going to take it away from him. And then they wouldn't even have a place to raise pigs or to do anything. They would just probably have to go live in the woods like a turkey or a snake or something would live in the woods. And so guess what? One day Ring the pig started squealing at Granddaddy, and he was like a dog. He got to wander around because he was tame and he didn't run away, and Granddaddy didn't need to put a leash on him when he was with Granddaddy, only when they were leading him off to somebody else's farm to keep him from going over in the bushes and eating something. He had business to attend to. So he led him up this rough hill up that was almost like a mountain that was just on the outskirts of their farm, but on their land. And it was full of rocks and bushes growing up, and it wasn't anything you could possibly farm. You couldn't plow it or plant anything on it because it was all full of rocks and just kind of scrubby bushes. And Ring the pig went right up that side of that little short mountain, that big hill or short mountain. He went right up the side of it. And when he got up there, he went into the bushes, just crawled his way right through into thick bushes, and started squealing and squealing at Granddaddy. And Granddaddy had to pull the bushes apart and crawl and dig his way through. And there was a hole. And my Granddaddy used to put his arms up like this and say, the hole was about as big around as if I held my arms up and touched my fingers together. And it was Ring that went in first. And he said it was very dark in there, and I didn't have anything, Granddaddy told me. So I just went in and hoped we could see what he was after in there. Granddaddy kind of thought maybe there was something to eat in there, like a rabbit or something they could take home and cook, because it was poor, and they didn't have very much to eat. But Ring was looking right at a place on the rocky wall where it was a kind of a flat piece of rock. And sitting on there was a big vase looking thing made out of baked clay, just sitting there, that was big around as a good sized watermelon and about that tall. And Granddaddy looked at that thing and he said, wonder what's in there. And Ring the pig was saying, wee, 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 like pigs do when they're trying to tell you something, because he didn't know how to talk very much Southern talk. And so Granddaddy went over there, and it was dusty and all in the mouth of that thing, and he said, whoosh, and blew some of the stuff off. And looking inside, there was a gold coin big as a biscuit. And Granddaddy said, look at that. And he tried to pick it up, and he could barely lift it because gold is very, very heavy. It's one of the heaviest metals. And so it's even heavier than lead. And so Granddaddy got the thing down, barely, and barely able to carry it. And he was 10 or 11. He wasn't a little boy. I mean, he was getting up there strong. He carried it out, and they crawled through that hole, and he got on the outside, and he cleaned it off, and this thing was completely full of gold coins. And so Granddaddy and Ring went down the mountain. Now, when they were climbing down, it was very hard, and this thing was so heavy Granddaddy could barely go. But Ring was big, tall pig and very strong and friendly to Granddaddy. And so Granddaddy put the bowl on his shoulder and held it in place, and Ring helped carry it down so that they could save the family if we could keep this gold. And so they got home all the way to the farmhouse, and guess what? Granddaddy's mother, my great-grandmother, took all of those coins and put them in a pan and washed them off. Gold doesn't rust, but it gets dirty if dirt settles in there in an old cave. And she made them, laid them out on the table till there was just a whole table covered with these coins out of this bucket made from clay, big around as a watermelon and about that tall, just full of all these gold coins. And when General McDowell, Granddaddy's father, who had been a star on each shoulder, 2 stars on each shoulder, general in the Southern Army, got home from working in the fields and hoeing making the weeds go down and the vegetables grow up, he was amazed, and he saw all that gold, and he said, where did that come from? And Granddaddy told him, and he said, well, this may belong to somebody else who might be just like us. They've lost their best stuff, and they might need their gold, so let's go up there and see if we can figure out whose this belongs to. So he got a piece of wood that would catch fire real easy, and they used to carry them around a long time ago, and they called them a torch. And it would be burning at the end and make enough light that you could see in the dark. And they went up the mountain, and it wasn't quite dark yet, but they got up the mountain, and they got into that cave crawling, and when they got in there, Granddaddy's father got the torch to burn. And he held it up, and Granddaddy showed him the shelf-looking piece of rock where the bucket had been sitting full of coins. And Granddaddy looked over there, and there was something on the ground, laying on the ground in the further back in the cave. And they walked back in that cave, and the door was little, but the cave was as big as a room. And so they walked back in the back of the cave, and there laying on the ground, having laid there for hundreds and maybe even 1,000 years, was a skull of a person and his bones laying there on the ground. Wow, what a sight. And Granddaddy came down and looked closely, and he said, look at this sword. This is a very ancient kind of sword. This is not the kind of sword anybody would use now. This is a kind of sword people used hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And they looked and they found an ancient dagger. And the clothes that were about to rot away were of a kind that nobody had worn in hundreds of years. And Granddaddy, father, great-granddaddy McDowell said, you know what? This man somehow found America before it got discovered by everybody, and he got here and came up in this cave because he was sick, or somebody was after him, or something was after him, and he came in here and he laid down there and he died. And he said, we can have the gold because he's long gone, and it was his, it's obvious. And he said that vase that it was in, or whatever that thing is, maybe a clay pot, something that it was in, nobody knows exactly what they did with it that long ago because we weren't back there. But he said, we've got to get this man down to our cemetery and get our minister to come, and we will have a funeral service for him and bury him with his sword and his dagger, and put a monument up there that this unknown man saved the McDowell family thanks to Ring the pig. Thank you. Now I'm going to tell you another little story about Ring the pig. But first, let me just finish one little thing. Granddaddy got the gold down in town to the jewelry company man, and he told him how much pieces of that gold, and it wasn't very many, just a small little handful out of that big jar, big as a watermelon and that tall. That was how much it would take to pay the taxes, and the government wouldn't take his farm away. So he went and paid off his farm, and that was the end of that part. And now, here's a little fun story about Ring not saving the family, but just having fun. And yet, the family loved it because he helped feed them. And you say, how does a pig feed a family? Listen to the story. Ring the pig loved to fish. Granddaddy would go to the little river that ran by not far away. It wasn't a big river. It was about as wide as 2 automobiles, nose to nose. You know, not very wide at all. About if you park 2 cars with one's nose sticking at the back of the other car, that's how wide that little river was. But it had a lot of nice to eat fish in it called rainbow trout, and some other kinds of trout as well. And these trout were a good kind of fish for people to eat, and they liked to eat them back in those days. And so guess what? Granddaddy would tie a string on Ring the pig's ring in his nose, and on the end of the string would be a fish hook. And Granddaddy wanted to put a worm on there, but Ring said, "Whew, whew," and he went over in the grass and caught a grasshopper, and he brought it to Granddaddy, and Granddaddy put a grasshopper on there. And so Granddaddy would put his fishing pole out with a worm on it, and Ring would flip his head, and that string would go out there, and that grasshopper would be swimming around on the water trying to get to the shore, and a trout would come up and eat him just like that. And Ring would catch 3 fish for every 1 Granddaddy caught. And when they had enough fish for supper, they would take those fish and get them all prepared for supper and clean them up and wash them in that nice clean spring that's coming right down the river. I mean that nice clean river that's coming right down from the spring. And you know what? His mama, my granddaddy's mama, would cook those nice fish, and everybody would have a real good supper. Granddaddy and his brother and his sister and his mother and his father would all have a good supper because they had enough fish for everybody, thanks to Ring the pig. When Ring got old, some farmers a long time ago, when their pigs got old, used to just cook them. But they thought Ring was so valuable and such a wonderful pet and such a wonderful friend. When he got old and wasn't able to go around to the farms again and just stayed at home, they fed him every day with good food. And when he died, they buried him in the McDowell Cemetery with a stone on it carved to say, "Here lies Ring the pig who saved the McDowell family farm." I hope y'all have enjoyed hearing about Ring the pig. I certainly did when I was a little boy, and my granddaddy McDowell told it to me.